In the competitive hallways of middle school, 12-year-old Imani battles not just for grades, but for her family's future. Driven by a fierce love for her impoverished family, she studies day and night, her brilliance a quiet fire against the privileged world of Charlotte, a wealthy rival who has always known success. The two girls are locked in a silent academic war until a single, impossibly difficult math problem and a teacher's secret admiration set in motion a series of events that will change everything. Forced into an unlikely partnership, they discover that while their worlds couldn't be more different, the burdens they carry might be more alike than they ever imagined. Will these students become friends and challenge mathematics with their intelligence, or would their rivalry continue forever? If you liked the video and have subscribed to my channel, let's move on to our story. Enjoy watching. Imani's world was painted in shades of worn-out resilience. It wasn't gray, not exactly, but it lacked the vibrant, saturated colors she saw on television or in the magazines her mother sometimes brought home from work. Their three-room apartment, squeezed onto the third floor of a brick building that had seen better decades, smelled of her mother's cooking, a comforting spicy mix of onions and garlic, and the faint, ever-present scent of old wood and the city's exhaust. The walls, once a hopeful cream, were now a patchwork of scuffs, and the single window in her bedroom looked out onto a concrete alley and the back of another identical building. At 12 years old, Imani knew the precise weight of a late rent notice. She knew the way her mother's smile could become tight at the edges when she talked about the grocery bill, and the silent, hungry glances her younger brother and sister, Marcus and Maya, would cast at the half-empty cereal box in the morning. She didn't resent it. Instead, she carried the weight like a purpose. It was a pressure that didn't crush her but refined her, turning her into something harder and more focused than other kids her age. It was the reason her lamp was the only light on in the apartment past midnight, its yellow glow spilling onto the open pages of an algebra textbook. While other girls her age were lost in the latest celebrity gossip or dreaming of new clothes, Imani's mind was a fortress of numbers and formulas. She could lose herself for hours in the elegant logic of geometry or the satisfying complexity of a quadratic equation. It wasn't just a hobby, it was a promise. Each correct solution, each new concept she mastered, felt like a brick she was laying for a different future. A future where her mother didn't have to work 3 jobs and her siblings never had to pretend they weren't hungry. She studied not just for herself but for them. It was a selfless, fierce kind of ambition that burned brighter than any flame. Her desk was a repurposed bedside table, its surface littered with sharpened pencils and stacks of books. She didn't have the fancy high-tech gadgets some of her classmates did. No sleek laptops or electronic tablets. She had her books, dog-eared and marked with her careful annotations, and a stack of loose-leaf paper. Her most prized possession was a well-loved copy of an advanced math text, a discarded book her teacher, Mr. Davis, had given her after noticing her quick mind. She treated it like a treasure map, each page promising a path to a better life. Her younger siblings, Marcus, 8, and Maya, 6, were her biggest cheerleaders and her biggest motivation. They saw her as a hero, a genius who could make a calculator sing. When she was stuck on a particularly difficult problem, she would imagine their wide, trusting eyes looking up at her, and the answer would often come to her, clear as day. She knew what they were counting on and she was not going to let them down. They shared a room and their soft, rhythmic breathing was a lullaby that both soothed and energized her as she worked into the quiet hours. School was a different kind of world. It was where the pressures of home collided with the reality of a different life. Imani was a standout student, not just in her grades but in her sheer intensity. She was always the first to raise her hand, the one who asked the most insightful questions, the one who didn't just memorize formulas but understood the principles behind them. Her intelligence was undeniable, a raw, undeniable force that seemed to surprise her teachers. She was not a teacher's pet, though, but an intellectual peer, a young mind that challenged them as much as they challenged her. This excellence, however, drew a kind of attention that wasn't always welcome. It drew the attention of Charlotte Evans. Charlotte was a different species entirely. She was from a world that was as foreign to Imani as another planet. Her clothes were always brand new, her backpack a different designer brand every month, and her hair and nails were always perfectly styled, a testament to a life of ease and endless resources. Charlotte was also smart, no one could deny that. She had attended the best private elementary schools, had access to the best tutors, and her grades were consistently at the top of the class. Her intellect felt polished and manicured like something she was born with, not something she had to fight for. The rivalry between them was a silent war fought in the classroom and on test papers. It started as a subtle competition. Who could answer a question faster, who would get the highest score on the weekly pop quiz. But it didn't stay subtle. During lunch, Charlotte and her friends would often make snide remarks. They would talk loudly about their lavish vacations, their new electronics, or the tutors who helped them with their homework, all while glancing at Imani with a knowing smirk. Imani ignored them, focusing on the sandwich her mother had packed, a simple peanut butter and jelly, and the pages of her book. She had learned early on that her peace was more valuable than their fleeting words. She had to save her energy for the real fight, the one that would take her and her family out of this life. The pressure at home was a constant hum, a background noise that she had grown so used to she barely noticed it anymore. Last week, her mother had had to work an extra night shift to pay for a new tire for their old car, which had left her exhausted and with little time to help Imani with a tricky physics problem. That night, Imani had stayed up until 2 a.m., hunched over her textbook, her mind a whirlwind of variables and forces. It was in those moments that the realness of their situation hit her the hardest. The weight of it felt immense, but it was also a powerful fuel. She knew that every single answer she got right, every single problem she solved, was a step towards lifting that weight from her mother's shoulders and building a future for her family. The contrast between her life and Charlotte's was not just about money, it was about the very nature of their ambition. Charlotte's desire to succeed seemed rooted in a need to maintain her status, to prove she was just as good as she seemed. Imani's ambition, however, was a lifeline. It was a deep, guttural need to survive and to thrive, to break free from the cycle she had been born into. Her academic excellence was not for glory or a perfect grade, but for survival, a fact that made every late night of studying worth it. And as she closed her textbook at 1:15 in the morning, the complex equations still swirling in her mind, she felt a profound sense of purpose. The silent, worn-out apartment was not a cage, it was a launching pad. And she was ready to take flight. Charlotte's world was painted in a different spectrum entirely, a palette of sleek modernity and muted luxury. Her house wasn't a home in the traditional sense. It was a sprawling, 3-story architectural statement, all sharp angles and floor-to-ceiling glass that looked out onto a perfectly manicured lawn and a shimmering infinity pool. The air inside was always cool and filtered, carrying the faint scent of fresh lilies and the antiseptic cleanliness of a space designed for show, not for living. The walls were stark white, adorned with abstract art that she was told was priceless but found utterly baffling. Everything was flawless, from the polished marble floors to the perfectly plumped cushions on the minimalist furniture. At 12, Charlotte knew the precise weight of an expectation. It was the heavy silence that followed a less-than-perfect grade on her report card, the cool, assessing look her father would give her over the dinner table when he asked about her day. It was the weight of a legacy, the unspoken understanding that she was the heir to a fortune built on relentless success and impeccable image. Her father, a titan of corporate law, and her mother, a celebrated interior designer, were both meticulous in their pursuit of excellence. Their praise, when it came, was a fleeting thing, a quick nod of approval before they were off to the next meeting or gala. Their affection was conditional, a prize to be earned with straight A's and a flawless public persona. Unlike Imani, Charlotte's mind was a fortress of learned knowledge. She had attended the most exclusive private schools since kindergarten, where the curriculum was tailored to the gifted and the pace was dizzying. She had private tutors for every subject, experts who came to the house with custom lesson plans and advanced materials. Her intellect, as she saw it, was not a natural talent but a product of meticulous engineering, a high-performance engine tuned with the finest resources money could buy. She knew the answers to every problem not just because she was smart, but because she had been trained, polished, and perfected for every conceivable academic challenge. Her bedroom was not just a place to sleep, it was a command center. A massive, curved screen dominated one wall, her laptop was the latest model, and her desk was a custom-made piece of dark wood, always immaculately organized. She didn't have to work into the late hours under a single lamp. She had a dedicated study room with professional lighting, noise-canceling headphones, and a library of every textbook imaginable. Her siblings, a brother in college and a sister at a prestigious boarding school, were distant figures, their lives a series of achievements that she was constantly measured against. They were not her cheerleaders but her competitors. School was her stage and she was the star. She was used to being at the top, to having the effortless brilliance that came with her upbringing. Her academic success was not a goal in itself, but a necessary performance. It was how she maintained her standing among her peers and, more importantly, in her parents' eyes. She was a reflection of their success, a walking, talking resume of their impeccable taste and boundless wealth. Her perfection was a testament to their own. Then there was Imani. Imani was a glitch in the perfect system, a wild card that Charlotte couldn't account for. She wasn't polished, she was raw. She didn't have the latest gadgets, she had old dog-eared books. She didn't have tutors, she had an intensity that seemed to burn from within. And yet, she was always there, a shadow on the edge of Charlotte's perfection, a constant reminder that some things couldn't be bought. Imani's intelligence wasn't a result of her environment, but a triumph over it. And that terrified Charlotte. The rivalry between them was a defense mechanism for Charlotte, a way to reclaim her narrative. When she saw Imani's hand shoot up in class, her heart would race with a mix of fear and indignation. It was an unfair fight in her mind. Imani's success was a challenge to everything Charlotte had ever been told about her own superiority. So she resorted to mockery, a blunt tool to try and reassert her dominance. The snide comments about vacations and clothes weren't just to be cruel, they were to remind Imani and herself of the vast chasm between their worlds. It was her way of saying, "You may be smart, but you'll never be me." But the mockery felt hollow. Imani's unwavering silence in the face of her taunts was more unnerving than any verbal comeback could have been. It made Charlotte's words feel small and petty, stripped of their power. It was like trying to punch a ghost. Imani's focus on her books and her singular goal was a shield that Charlotte's barbs could not penetrate. Imani didn't care about the designer bags or the luxurious vacations. She had a purpose that transcended the shallow world Charlotte was trapped in, and that made Charlotte profoundly insecure. The pressure at home was a constant, low-level anxiety. Last week, her mother had been upset because Charlotte's math grade had been a 98, not a 100. 2 points, Charlotte, she'd said, her voice laced with disappointment. For all the time and money we've invested, we expect perfection. That night, Charlotte had stayed up, not because she needed to study, but because she was practicing problems she had already mastered, a frantic, repetitive effort to prove to herself that she was, in fact, perfect. It was in those moments that the reality of her gilded cage hit her the hardest. Her achievements were not her own, they were a debt she was constantly paying. Her academic excellence was not for her own fulfillment, but for the validation of others. And as she closed her immaculate textbook, the complex equations still swirling in her mind, she felt a profound sense of loneliness. Her perfect world wasn't a launch pad, it was a prison. And she was desperate to prove she was worthy of it. The tension between the two girls, fueled by such different kinds of pressure, was now reaching its peak. Their silent war was about to become public, and the outcome would change everything. The math class, the one place where they were supposed to be judged on a level playing field, was about to become the battlefield for their most important confrontation yet. The air in Mr. Davis's math class felt different that Monday. It was thick with a quiet tension, the kind that precedes a storm. The students, usually buzzing with the last bits of weekend energy, were unusually subdued. Imani sat at her desk, her textbook open, but her eyes kept drifting to the front of the room. Mr. Davis, a man with a gentle face but a mind that moved with the speed of light, was not teaching. He was pacing, his hands clasped behind his back, a faint smile playing on his lips. This wasn't his usual style. Charlotte in the front row seemed to sense it too. She kept her posture perfectly straight, her hands resting neatly on her pristine notebook, but Imani could see a flicker of unease in her eyes. It was a rare crack in Charlotte's armor of confidence. The two girls had spent the past week engaged in their silent war, each trying to outdo the other on every pop quiz and homework assignment. Last week's test, which had resulted in a tie, had only intensified the unspoken animosity. Now Mr. Davis was about to change the game entirely. He stopped his pacing and turned to face the class. His smile widened. "Good morning, class," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Today we're going to do something a little different. I've been observing two of our brightest students, and I believe it's time we see what they're truly capable of. Not just with a test on paper but in a live demonstration of their intellect." A ripple of whispers went through the room. Mr. Davis held up a piece of chalk. I have a problem here. It's a bit advanced for our current curriculum. It's a question from a university-level math competition. Whoever can solve it on the board first will receive a perfect 100 on their exam grade for this term. No pressure, of course. He chuckled, but the class knew he was serious. A perfect 100 was unheard of, a grade that could boost a student's overall average significantly and put them on the path to academic awards. He wrote a complex equation on the whiteboard, its symbols a mix of advanced algebra and calculus concepts they had only touched upon. It was a beast of a problem, a convoluted puzzle of variables and functions that seemed to defy an easy solution. Mr. Davis turned to the two girls. Charlotte, Imani, please come up to the board. Charlotte stood immediately, a determined glint in her eyes. This was her element. This was the moment she could finally prove her superiority, not just to Imani but to the entire class. Her walk to the board was confident and practiced. She took the chalk with an air of authority and began to write, her movements brisk and decisive. She started with a familiar approach, using a formula she had seen in her private tutoring sessions, a method she was sure would unravel the problem. But as she worked, her confidence began to waver. She erased a line, then another, her brow furrowed in confusion. The problem was not responding to her polished, textbook-perfect methods. It was a different kind of challenge, one that required creative thinking and an intuitive grasp of the underlying principles, not just rote memorization. The numbers began to blur and a slow, creeping panic started to set in. The effortless flow she was used to was gone, replaced by a frantic, disjointed effort. Imani watched Charlotte from the other side of the board. She hadn't moved with the same quickness, a flicker of genuine anxiety passing through her. This wasn't just about a grade, this was a public display, and for a fleeting moment she feared the shame of failure. But then she looked at the problem again. The jumble of symbols began to untangle themselves in her mind, revealing a pattern, a logical progression. She saw a different way in, a more elegant and direct path that bypassed the complicated formulas Charlotte was struggling with. It was an intuitive leap, born not from her books, but from her countless hours spent wrestling with difficult concepts on her own. It was a gut feeling, a mathematical instinct she had honed in the quiet, late-night hours. Taking the other piece of chalk, she moved to the board. She didn't start with a formula. Instead, she began by simplifying, breaking the massive problem into smaller, more manageable pieces. Her movements were slow, deliberate, and sure. She wasn't frantic, she was professional. The class was silent, mesmerized by the two different approaches. Charlotte was a whirlwind of frantic calculations, her face a mask of frustration. Imani was a study in calm focus, her hand gliding across the board with an almost serene grace. She wrote each step clearly, explaining the logic of her movements to herself in a silent, inner dialogue. She saw the answer not as a result of a formula, but as the inevitable conclusion of a perfect, logical sequence. Charlotte, with a huff of frustration, finally put down her chalk, her face flushed with defeat. The problem was beyond her. She looked over at Imani, who was still working, a single-minded determination etched on her face. Charlotte felt a pang of something more complex than frustration, a mix of awe and a grudging respect. Imani wasn't just a rival, she was a force of nature. Imani finished her work, the final number a satisfying, perfect solution to the complex problem. She put her chalk down and took a step back. A collective gasp rippled through the room. The silence was absolute, broken only by the soft click of Mr. Davis's chalk as he walked to the board. He looked from the problem to Imani's solution, then back again. His face remained neutral, giving no hint of his reaction, but his eyes, when they met Imani's, held a depth of admiration that she had never seen before. The bell for recess rang, a loud, jarring sound that broke the spell. Students grabbed their backpacks, their chatter a low hum as they processed what they had just witnessed. Imani was packing her bag when Mr. Davis spoke, his voice quiet. "Imani, could you stay for a moment?" A wave of dread washed over her. She knew something was coming, but she had no idea what. She walked to his desk, her heart pounding a quick rhythm against her ribs. Mr. Davis waited for the last student to leave before he spoke. "Imani," he said, his voice now soft with sincere admiration. "That was brilliant. In all my years of teaching, I have never seen a student solve a problem like that with such professionalism and grace. You have a remarkable gift." Imani's relief was immediate, followed by a surge of pure joy. She had done it. She had won. Mr. Davis continued, his voice taking on a more serious tone. I have been observing your work all semester. I know you study day and night. It's clear to me that you have a future in mathematics, a bright one. And a gift like yours should not go to waste because of a lack of resources. I'm going to speak to the school administration about you. I'm going to make sure they know what a special talent you are. We're going to find a way to provide you with the support you need. Financial support. Imani's world, which had always been so meticulously planned, suddenly expanded. The weight on her shoulders felt a little lighter, and a new kind of hope, one she hadn't dared to dream of, began to take root in her heart. The promise from Mr. Davis was a lighthouse in the fog of Imani's life. It wasn't a tangible thing yet, just a whispered assurance, but it felt more real than any grade, any perfect score. It was a gateway to a future that, until now, had been a beautiful but distant fantasy. That evening, as she sat at her repurposed desk, the worn-out wood felt less like a symbol of her family's struggles and more like a testament to her journey. The textbook wasn't just a collection of formulas, it was a treasure map leading to the promised land. A perfect 100 on the exam felt like a key, unlocking a door to a brighter tomorrow. She felt a new kind of energy course through her. The late-night studying wasn't a grind anymore, it was a joyful pursuit. She wasn't just doing homework, she was building her destiny, piece by piece, formula by formula. When Marcus and Maya crept into her room, their eyes heavy with sleep, to ask her to tell them a story, she didn't tell them one from a book. She told them a story about a girl who could solve any puzzle, a girl who built a bridge to the stars with nothing but her mind. Their wide-eyed fascination fueled her even more. She was their hero, and now she felt she had a real chance to live up to that. The next day in the school halls, things were different. Students who had never spoken to her before gave her a nod or a brief, awkward smile. The reputation she had built on quiet brilliance now had a public face. She was the girl who had solved the impossible problem. She noticed too that Charlotte's usual entourage was less vibrant, their laughter a bit more subdued. Charlotte herself walked with a straighter back than usual, but the casual, confident swagger was gone. She didn't look at Imani, but Imani could feel her presence, a tension in the air that was different from before. It was no longer the electric charge of rivalry, but a heavy, thoughtful silence. At lunch, Imani found her usual quiet corner under a tree. She opened her physics textbook, losing herself in the intricate diagrams of forces and motion. She was so engrossed that she didn't hear Charlotte approach until a shadow fell over her book. Imani looked up, bracing for the usual snide remark, the subtle jab about her clothes or her lack of a new phone. But Charlotte didn't say a word. She just stood there, a peculiar expression on her face that Imani couldn't decipher. It wasn't the look of superiority, or even of annoyance. It was curious. Finally, Charlotte spoke, her voice surprisingly soft. That was a really interesting way you solved that problem. Imani blinked, unsure how to respond. Thanks, she said simply, her guard still up. I mean it, Charlotte insisted, her gaze fixed on Imani's textbook. I had a tutor for that kind of stuff. You went to MIT. You showed me the standard way, the formulaic way. You saw a shortcut. You made it look so simple. I don't think I've ever seen anyone do that before. Imani felt a knot of suspicion unraveling in her stomach. This wasn't a trap. This was an admission. A genuine moment of respect from her fiercest rival. It just made sense to me, Imani said, the words feeling foreign and small. Charlotte nodded, a slow, thoughtful gesture. Yeah. My dad says the best solutions are the ones that are elegant. You know, simple but brilliant. She paused, a rare flicker of vulnerability in her eyes. My dad wanted me to solve it. He told me he was going to come in and talk to Mr. Davis about me. He was so sure I'd get it. She looked down at her hands. I guess he's not going to do that now. Imani felt a surprising pang of empathy. She had always seen Charlotte as the girl who had everything, the girl for whom success was a given. She had never considered that Charlotte might be under her own kind of pressure, a different, but no less intense, burden of expectation. Imani's own drive came from a need to prove her worth to the world, but Charlotte seemed to come from a desperate need to prove her worth to her own family. I didn't think about it that way, Imani said quietly, a new understanding dawning on her. I just wanted to get it right. It was a really hard problem. Charlotte looked back up, a faint smile touching her lips. "You make it seem easy," she said. It wasn't a compliment, not exactly, but it wasn't a put-down either. It was a bridge, a tiny piece of common ground. The bell for the end of lunch rang and the moment was broken. Charlotte nodded and walked away, leaving Imani to stare at the spot where she had been standing, a flurry of new thoughts and feelings swirling in her mind. The rivalry wasn't over, not yet. But something had changed. The solid wall of animosity that had separated them was gone, replaced by a crack, a small fissure of shared humanity. Imani had been so focused on her own struggles, on her family's future, that she had never considered what motivated her rival. She had only seen the mockery, not the pressure behind it. Now, for the first time, she saw a person, not a stereotype. Mr. Davis's offer and the public display of her intellect had done more than just open a door to financial support. It had changed the entire social landscape around her. People saw her now, not just as the quiet girl who always had her hand up, but as a genuine prodigy. And it had, unexpectedly, allowed Charlotte to see her too. For all of Charlotte's privilege, she had failed publicly, while Imani, with nothing but her raw intelligence, had succeeded. It was a humbling experience for Charlotte, and a validating one for Imani. The dynamic between them was no longer about rich versus poor, but about two young women, each carrying a heavy weight, who had just discovered they were more alike than they had ever imagined. The journey ahead was no longer about a rivalry, but about something new and yet to be defined. The air between Imani and Charlotte in the following weeks was a strange and quiet thing. The public math showdown had left a mark, a silent truce that replaced their open hostility. There were no more snide remarks from Charlotte, no more withering glares from Imani. Instead, there was a heavy, unspoken acknowledgement of what had transpired. The competition, which had once been the sole axis of their relationship, had been redefined. The opportunity to bridge the gap came in the form of a class project. Mr. Davis, with a knowing look in Imani's direction, announced a new long-term assignment, a research project on the history of mathematics. He then began pairing students. When he called out their names, a collective sigh went through the room. Imani and Charlotte. It was a pairing that would have been unthinkable a week ago. Charlotte's shoulders stiffened, and Imani felt a familiar wave of dread. But this time it was different. It wasn't the fear of mockery, but the anxiety of having to navigate an unfamiliar and awkward social terrain. She had a project to do, and her partner was the one person she had spent the entire school year trying to avoid. They met after class, standing awkwardly by the lockers. "So," Charlotte began, her voice brittle, "when do you want to start? My place or yours?" Imani's heart sank. The last thing she wanted was for Charlotte to see her home. The peeling paint on the door, the cramped living room that doubled as a playroom, the worn-out furniture. It was the antithesis of Charlotte's world of sleek perfection. She imagined Charlotte's pity, the quiet judgment that would confirm everything she had always feared about her own family's struggles. "Mine," Imani said, the word coming out as a strained whisper. It was a matter of principle. She wouldn't be ashamed. This was her reality and she had nothing to hide. "After school tomorrow. I'll text you the address." The walk home the next day felt heavier than usual. Imani was acutely aware of every crack in the sidewalk, every weed growing in the lawn, every car parked on the street that was older than Charlotte herself. When Charlotte's father's gleaming black sedan pulled up and Charlotte got out, a designer backpack slung over her shoulder, Imani's anxiety spiked. The front door of Imani's home was a faded blue, chipped in several places. The screen door was bent at one corner. Imani fumbled with her key, her hands shaking slightly. Charlotte stood a few feet back, taking it all in with a quiet, observant gaze. When Imani finally got the door open, the sound of her family filled the air. Her mother's voice was singing softly in the kitchen, and her little brother, Marcus, was laughing as her sister, Maya, tried to read him a book on the floor. The living room, with its mismatched furniture and overflowing bookshelves, was a stark contrast to the sterile perfection of Charlotte's home. It was filled with life, with a warm, chaotic energy that was both overwhelming and comforting. Charlotte's face, for a brief moment, was a mask of pure surprise. She wasn't used to this much humanity. Maya and Marcus, ever curious, looked up and their eyes widened at the sight of Charlotte. "Who are you?" Marcus asked, his voice a pure, innocent treble. "This is Charlotte," Imani said, her voice a little too loud. "We're working on a school project." "Oh," Maya said, her face lighting up. Can we help with the homework? Charlotte blinked, taken aback. Her own home was a place of quiet reverence for her parents' work. A place where children were seen but not heard, where academic work was a solitary pursuit. The idea of siblings wanting to join in was foreign to her. They retreated to Imani's room, a small space with a single bed and the desk she had worked on for so many years. The walls were covered with handwritten notes, old test papers with perfect scores, and a world map dotted with pins marking the universities she dreamed of attending. Charlotte's eyes scanned the room, not with judgment, but with a quiet sense of wonder. This room, so small and simple, was a testament to a kind of ambition she had never seen up close. They laid their books out on the desk, the research topic feeling like a shield between them. For a while, they worked in silence, a focused quiet broken only by the scratching of their pens. But the silence wasn't hostile anymore. It was thoughtful. Finally, Charlotte broke the silence. "So, you really want to go to Princeton?" she asked, her voice soft. Imani looked up, startled. She hadn't realized Charlotte had noticed the pin on her map. "Yeah," she said. "I've wanted to for a long time. It's a dream." "My brother goes to Yale," Charlotte said, the words heavy with a strange mix of pride and a kind of exhaustion. "He's studying law like my dad." "Expected. I'm supposed to follow in his footsteps." Imani felt a new piece of the puzzle click into place. Charlotte wasn't just the rich girl who had it all. She was the girl who had a path laid out for her, a path she didn't necessarily choose. She was a reflection of her parents' success, not her own. Imani, in contrast, was carving her own path, creating her own future, and in that sense she had a freedom Charlotte could only imagine. They spent the next few hours working, and as they did, they talked. They discovered a shared love for science fiction novels. They found they both loved the intricate logic of puzzles, not just in math but in everyday life. They talked about the things that drove them. Imani spoke of her family, of her desire to give them a better life. Charlotte spoke of the pressure she felt, the constant need for perfection that felt suffocating. As the sun began to set, casting a golden light through Imani's window, they had not only made significant progress on their project but had also built a fragile but genuine connection. When Charlotte's mother called to say she was outside, Charlotte gathered her things with a certain reluctance. At the front door, she turned to Imani, a small, genuine smile on her face. "Thank you for letting me come over," she said. I really like your family. They're so happy." The words were a quiet testament to her own lonely world. Imani smiled back, a warmth spreading through her chest that had nothing to do with the setting sun. "I'll see you tomorrow, Charlotte." As Charlotte stepped back into her father's luxury sedan, she looked at the faded blue door and the bright, messy living room behind it. She had come to Imani's home expecting to see a world of lack, of poverty. Instead, she had seen a world of abundance, an abundance of love, of laughter, of life. And for the first time she felt a quiet longing for something more than just a perfect grade. The weight of tomorrow that Imani carried was heavy, but it was also a beautiful, self-made thing. And Charlotte, for the first time, wondered what it would be like to carry a weight of her own choosing. The school project, once a dreaded obligation, had become a safe space, a world of two where the old rivalry ceased to exist. Imani and Charlotte now met daily, not just in the library or during lunch, but after school, alternating between their two very different homes. The initial awkwardness had melted away, replaced by the easy rhythm of shared purpose. They discovered that their minds, once locked in a silent competition, complemented each other in surprising ways. Imani, with her intuitive leaps and unconventional approaches, would find a brilliant, elegant solution. Charlotte, with her meticulous research skills and vast resources, would find the data and historical context to support Imani's ideas. The first time Imani went to Charlotte's house, the feeling of culture shock was overwhelming. The house was a modern architectural marvel, all clean lines and minimalist furniture. The living room was a cavernous space with a floor-to-ceiling glass wall that looked out onto a perfectly manicured lawn and a swimming pool that shimmered in the afternoon sun. But what struck Imani most wasn't the opulence, it was the quiet. The house was a fortress of silence. There was no laughter echoing from other rooms, no scent of cooking, no cluttered evidence of a busy, happy family. It was beautiful, but it felt like a museum. Charlotte's room, too, was a perfect expression of this world. The bed was impeccably made, the desk was cleared of all but a single laptop, and the walls were bare. Imani noticed a faint layer of dust on a shelf of expensive-looking books that looked like they had never been opened. It was a stark contrast to her own room, which, while small, was overflowing with life and purpose. One afternoon, as they worked on a particularly complex section of their presentation, Imani found herself staring at a framed photograph on Charlotte's desk. It was of Charlotte and her parents, all dressed in formal attire, their faces a mix of strained smiles. Charlotte followed her gaze. "That was from my dad's company gala last year," Charlotte said, her voice flat. "We have to go to one every quarter. My mom spends a week planning my outfit." "My mom spends a week planning our dinner for my birthday," Imani said, a small smile on her face. "Last year she made my favorite, collard greens and fried chicken. It was messy and we probably made a huge mess, but it was perfect." Charlotte looked at her, and for the first time, Imani saw a hint of true longing in her eyes. "I don't know what my mom's favorite food is," Charlotte said quietly, the weight of the confession hanging in the silent room. That night, after they had finished their work, Charlotte didn't want to stop talking. They moved to the plush chairs in her living room, and the conversation drifted from school to life, from pressures to dreams. Charlotte confessed that her parents' constant focus on her academic success and social standing was a heavy burden. "I feel like I'm a project to them," she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. "A return on their investment. That's why I was so angry when you beat me. It wasn't just about the grade, it was about failing my family." Imani listened, truly listening for the first time. She had always been so fixated on her own struggles, on her own fight for survival and a better future, that she had never considered what it was like for someone who had everything. She had always seen Charlotte's privilege as a shield, a guarantee of success. She hadn't seen it as a gilded cage. "I was so wrong about you," Imani finally said, the words feeling both liberating and terrifying. "I thought you were just spoiled. That everything came easy for you. I thought you were making fun of me because you thought you were better. But I get it now. It's a different kind of pressure, but it's still pressure." Charlotte smiled, a genuine, warm smile that transformed her face. "You were right to think that. I was horrible to you. And I was so jealous of you. You have something I don't. You have a reason to fight. A real reason. My life is just planned out. Every step is already decided for me." A comfortable silence settled between them. The unspoken rivalry was gone, replaced by a deep and surprising empathy. The two girls, from opposite ends of the economic and social spectrum, had found common ground in the universal struggle to find their own paths. As the weeks passed, their friendship became a source of strength for both of them. Charlotte began to look forward to the chaotic warmth of Imani's home, to the sound of Maya and Marcus's laughter, to the smell of Imani's mother's cooking. Imani, in turn, learned how to navigate Charlotte's world. She discovered that a quiet, serious conversation with Charlotte could be as enriching as a lively debate with her family. One day Mr. Davis stopped Imani in the hallway. "Imani," he said, his voice low and conspiratorial, "the administration is very impressed. We have a meeting set up for next week to discuss the financial support. I wanted to tell you so you could be prepared." Imani's heart soared and a perfect, genuine smile spread across her face. It was real. The dream was happening. Later that day she told Charlotte the news. Instead of the usual flash of competitive envy, Charlotte's face lit up with a joy that was completely and utterly sincere. "That's amazing, Imani," Charlotte said, a big smile on her face. "I told you. You're brilliant." And for the first time in her life, Imani felt a success that was not hers alone. It was a victory they had both earned. The girl who had once been her fiercest rival was now her greatest supporter. The path to the future, which she had always thought she had to walk alone, now felt like a journey they would take together. The weight on her shoulders was still there, but now she wasn't carrying it alone. The principal's office was a world of hushed grandeur, a stark contrast to the lively, cluttered chaos of Imani's home. The walls were lined with dark mahogany bookshelves filled with volumes that looked pristine and untouched. A large, ornate clock on the wall ticked with a sound that felt loud and judgmental in the silence. Mr. Davis was already there, his presence a comforting island of familiarity in the sea of polished wood and intimidating formality. Imani sat between her parents, feeling their quiet tension. Her father, usually so stoic and strong, kept his hands clasped tightly in his lap, and her mother, who always had a smile for everyone, now had a worried crease between her brows. The principal, a stern-looking woman with a crisp blazer and a no-nonsense air, entered the room, followed by the head of the school's administrative board, a formidable man named Mr. Harrington. Imani's heart pounded against her ribs. This wasn't just a conversation, this was a verdict. The principal wasted no time. "Imani, thank you and your parents for coming in. Mr. Davis has been exceptionally enthusiastic about your work." She gave a faint, almost imperceptible smile. "We've seen your academic records and they are frankly beyond impressive. Your performance on the recent math problem in particular was truly remarkable. It showed not only a mastery of concepts but an innate understanding of logic that is rare for a student of your age." Imani felt her mother's hand squeeze hers, and she could feel her father straighten his posture with a silent pride. Mr. Harrington, who had been observing the family with a neutral expression, finally spoke. "We believe in recognizing and nurturing talent wherever we find it. Mr. Davis has proposed a significant change in our scholarship program, a special fund for students with demonstrable academic merit who require financial assistance." He paused and Imani held her breath, the air in her lungs feeling thick and heavy. "Effective immediately," he continued, "we would like to offer Imani a full-ride scholarship for the remainder of her middle school and, pending a review of her continued performance, a guaranteed academic scholarship for her high school career at our affiliated institution, Northwood Preparatory." The words hit Imani like a wave, a tidal surge of pure, unfiltered joy. Her mother gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Her father's face, usually so composed, broke into a wide, genuine smile, and for the first time in as long as Imani could remember, she saw tears welling in his eyes. The weight of all their worries, all their struggles, all their long nights and sacrifices, was lifting. This wasn't just a scholarship, it was a promise. It was the bridge they had always dreamed of, a path from their worn-out neighborhood to a future filled with possibility. After they signed the papers and shook hands with the school officials, Imani's parents hugged her in the hallway. Her mother held her tightly, whispering, "You did it, baby. You did it." Her father's embrace was strong and silent, a world of pride conveyed without words. They left the school and went to the park, just the three of them. They didn't talk much about the details of the scholarship. Instead, they just sat there, basking in the glow of the setting sun, a new lightness in their hearts. That evening, as Imani was doing her homework, she received a text from Charlotte. "Did you talk to Mr. Davis?" Imani's fingers flew across the screen. "Not him, the principal. And the head of the admin board. They gave me a full scholarship. For the rest of middle school and high school." The reply was immediate. "Imani. OMG. That's incredible. I knew it. I knew it. You deserve it so much. We have to celebrate tomorrow." The sincerity in Charlotte's text was a different kind of joy for Imani. Charlotte's support felt as real and as vital as the scholarship itself. The next day, Charlotte was waiting for her by the front gate of the school, a huge smile on her face. "I'm so proud of you," she said, giving Imani a quick, uncharacteristically enthusiastic hug. "My parents were, well, they were a little surprised when I told them. My mom said, that's a very generous thing for the school to do, but my dad just didn't say anything. He was quiet all of dinner." Imani's heart sank a little. She had hoped this would be a win for both of them, a public acknowledgement of her worth that would also validate their friendship. But she saw now that for Charlotte's family, it wasn't about her success, but about their daughter's failure. Her father, Mr. Harrington, had been so neutral in the office, but Imani realized now that his silence wasn't a sign of indifference, it was a sign of defeat. Later, during lunch, Charlotte was unusually quiet. "My dad," she finally said, picking at her sandwich, "he said he was going to talk to the principal. To see if he could arrange something for me. A special position on the student council or something. To show my leadership potential." She rolled her eyes. "I told him I didn't want him to. I said I was happy for you. He just looked at me like I was speaking a different language." Charlotte's parents, with their endless pressure and their focus on image, were a different kind of prison than Imani's poverty. Imani's family was held back by a lack of resources, but they were bound together by an abundance of love. Charlotte's family had every resource in the world, but they were divided by a lack of genuine connection. Imani felt a new wave of empathy. "I'm so sorry, Charlotte," she said, her voice soft. Charlotte shook her head. "Don't be. You have something I don't. You have the freedom to choose your own path. My path is, well, it's already paved. But I think you've given me a reason to start looking for a different road." She looked up, and her eyes held a new kind of determination. "We're going to rock this school, you and me. And my dad can arrange all the fake leadership positions he wants. I'm going to do something real." The two girls sat in a comfortable, easy silence, not as rivals, not even just as friends, but as partners in a journey they were just beginning. The scholarship had changed everything for Imani, but it had also, in an unexpected way, changed everything for Charlotte. The light on the horizon was no longer just for Imani. It was a shared light, a promise that together, they could find their own way forward, forging a path that was truly their own. The scholarship was more than just a piece of paper. It was a seismic shift that reverberated through Imani's entire world. The first tangible change was a new, sturdy desk that her father bought for her from a second-hand store. It was still old, but it was solid, with no wobbly legs or splintered edges, and it felt like a symbol of her new foundation. The family's budget, once a source of constant, nagging anxiety, was no longer stretched to a breaking point. Her mother could buy fresh vegetables without a second thought, and her father's shoulders seemed to relax a little, the permanent slump of worry slowly fading away. The pressure was still there, but it was a different kind of pressure now, the weight of promise, not the burden of desperation. Imani's focus, however, remained unchanged. She studied with the same fierce determination, but now it was fueled by a joyful purpose. She spent her evenings teaching Maya and Marcus, turning math problems into games and history lessons into grand adventures. She watched their eyes light up with curiosity, and in their eager faces she saw a future that she was actively building for them. It was a tangible form of giving back, a way of sharing her success that felt more fulfilling than any personal gain. Her friendship with Charlotte blossomed into something truly remarkable. They were no longer just project partners, they were an academic powerhouse. They worked together seamlessly, their strengths complementing each other in ways neither had expected. Imani would take the lead on the complex theoretical problems, her mind making intuitive leaps that left Charlotte in awe. Charlotte, in turn, would meticulously organize their research, create stunning visual presentations on her state-of-the-art laptop, and articulate their findings with a polish that came from years of private schooling. They were a perfect fusion of raw talent and refined opportunity. Their collaboration extended beyond academics. During lunch they would sit together, an unlikely pair in the cafeteria. Charlotte would share stories about her lonely vacations and the expectations her parents had for her future. Imani would tell her about the chaotic joy of her family dinners, about the fierce love that held them together despite their struggles. They found that in each other, they had a sounding board for their deepest fears and aspirations, a safe space where they could be truly, unapologetically themselves. One afternoon, Charlotte called Imani, her voice tight with a strange mix of anger and resolve. "My dad," she began, her tone a low growl. "He's still trying to get me to join the student council. He said it would prepare me for my future in law. He said it was important for me to have these kinds of connections." "What did you say?" Imani asked, her heart pounding. "I told him no," Charlotte said, and Imani could hear the surprise and pride in her own voice. "I told him I was busy. I said I was working on a personal project with you, and that it was more important to me than any fake title." He got really quiet. He said, "Charlotte, this is for your own good." And I said, "No, Dad. It's for yours." Then I hung up. A long silence hung between them, a quiet testament to the magnitude of Charlotte's defiance. In that moment, Charlotte wasn't just a rich girl rebelling against her parents. She was a young woman finding her voice and her own sense of purpose. She had been inspired by Imani's story of creating her own future, of building something from nothing. And now she was starting to build her own. She was no longer a reflection of her parents' ambitions but a person with her own agency. The final exam was the last major hurdle of the school year. The moment they stepped into the classroom, Imani felt a wave of confidence wash over her. It was no longer a battle. It was a celebration of everything she had learned and everything she had overcome. She looked over at Charlotte, who offered her a quick, reassuring smile. They were in this together. The exam was a breeze. As Imani worked through the problems, she felt a profound sense of gratitude. Not just for the scholarship, but for the friendship that had changed her life. She thought back to the girl she was just a few months ago, the one who was so consumed by the weight of her family's future, so resentful of Charlotte's privilege. That girl was gone, replaced by a more confident, more compassionate and more capable young woman. On the last day of school, Imani and Charlotte walked out the front gates together. They stopped at the spot where they had shared their first, awkward conversation. The air between them was no longer filled with the tension of rivalry but with the warmth of shared history and the excitement of a new beginning. "I'm going to miss this," Charlotte said, looking at the school. "This has been the best year of my life." "Me too," Imani said, a genuine smile on her face. "Who would have thought?" "I always knew you were special, Imani," Charlotte said, her voice soft. I was too afraid to admit it." Imani smiled. "I was too afraid to think we could ever be friends." They stood there for a moment, two young women from vastly different worlds, now inextricably linked by a shared journey. Imani had found the bridge she needed to save her family's future. Charlotte had found a path she never knew she was looking for. The rivalry that had defined their relationship for so long had become the foundation for a friendship that would last a lifetime. They were no longer the poor girl and the rich girl. They were Imani and Charlotte, an unstoppable team, ready to build a world of their own. Dear viewer, if you've watched up to this point, thank you for your support. I have a small request. If you enjoy my stories, you can subscribe to the channel, and don't hesitate to share your thoughts about the stories in the comments. Enjoy watching. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like the video.